So,
Yeah.
so next we have Dr. Massimiliano Vitiello, I hope I said that correctly, who is a curator's distinguished professor of history and also the Norman Royall Professor in History and Classics. And he's going to talk to us today about the identity of citizens of Rome in the late Roman Empire and the early Middle Ages. He's a historian of ancient history, late antiquity, Byzantium, and the Middle Ages, with an emphasis on Roman history. So this will be very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all of you for inviting me here, and I really appreciate it. I hope this kind of research I'm doing is of interest for the audience. This is a part of a project in which I've been involved, like from the University of Cambridge and Bonn, on like the companion of the early medieval Rome. And so they asked me like to work on the identity of the Romans, like about the citizen of Rome, and that's where it's actually come from. I give some basic chronological information to the audience, and I'll start by telling that after like Emperor Caracalla, so during the 10th century, the Roman citizenship was granted to most of the inhabitants of the Roman Empire. The citizenship progressively lost its socially and juridical privileged status. In the largely urbanized empire, the big towns and important center of trade were home of large population of foreigners, which are called peregrini, as opposite to the local, the indigeni, of the city in which they live. And the principle that to each citizen his own city, the states, never disappeared. The city of Rome had always housed a great number of immigrants, and the migration intensified. Barbarians also settled in or close to the city. With a few exceptions of highly ranked officials, these barbarians were not Roman citizens. The sources distinguish them from the Roman by using the name of the tribe, like Goths, Burgundians, Vandals. Even after Rome lost the status of capital of the empire, its citizens maintained a privileged status. What scholars indicate as the cives Romani dom Roma applied generally to those male citizens who, since the late Republic, benefited from great grain distribution, and who, during the late antique period, were entitled to the distribution of grain, wine, and corn. In sources and chancery documents with specific reference to Rome, these citizens are addressed as the cives Romani or a populus Romano, and occasionally with a very archaic word emeriti, which goes back to the Republic. The ancient privileges continued after the political end of the Western Roman Empire, and traces of them can still be found after the Gothic War in the early medieval Italy ruled by Justinian. The community of Rome also counted a large number of poor, the infima plebs. Of the pauperes, only those who were recorded in the official list of the beneficiaries were entitled to the distribution. Some of these were extremely impoverished people, were called gente, who lived in the suburbs. These lower classes often benefited from other aid, like the alms from the church. As the power of the Roman Church increased, and in the middle of the 5th century, Pope Leo asserted the primacy of St. Peter and of the Bishop of Rome as his representative, the category of poor who received alms around the Vatican Hill became more defined. Merchants, businessmen, doctors, the teachers of liberal arts who were employed in the school of the old capital could be citizens or not. Among the citizens were the shop owners, corporati and tabernari, who were part of the structural economy of the city of Rome and were bounded by patronage to prefect and senator. Non-citizens included, for example, Greek retailers, they're called the pantacola. Like the senators, the plebs underwent a period of increasingly radical change between the late 4th and the late 6th century. The citizens of Rome, who claimed the generational deep roots in the cities, maintained a strong sense of pride in the history and monument. A good lens of analysis of this collective identity and pride is patronage and worshiping. In a polarized society held together by mutual obligation, patronage connects to power, elite representation, social intersection, and identity. Indeed, in late antique Rome, the patronage of the senatorial elite in particular remained a strong internal force. It survived the development of the 5th century, and it outlasted the end of the Roman Empire by 60 years. By the end of the Gothic War, the Senate was decimated, Rome was largely destroyed, and its population was reduced to a fraction. Within a few decades, the Roman bishops, who had traditionally provided alms to the poor, overtook the patronage of the Roman community. The most famous example is Pope Gregory the Great. Starting patronage in Rome by Romans and for Romans produce a view of how different communities in Rome use, appropriate, control, and reshape the late antique city. When the emperors abandoned Rome as the official residence, they deprived the city's population of the historic patron. This change became permanent after the defeat of Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312, shortly before Christianity was legalized. By the second decade of the 4th century, the Romans saw the emperors only on particular occasions, like the anniversary of the reign, triumphal parade, celebration of the consulship. On this and other occasions, the emperor sponsored games. While their stay in the old capital generally did not extend beyond a few months, for logistic reasons, some of the 5th century rulers spent substantial time in Rome. Emperors continued to exercise a degree of patronage over the senatorial elite. Nonetheless, the citizens of Rome never considered the late antique emperor as their patron. Clientelism had since the early republic bound the senatorial family to citizens who were mostly residents in Rome, and during the Principate it was largely exercised in the private sphere. However, during the 4th century, it assumed a stronger public dimension and it manifested more intensely in circumscription, corporation, and other business activities tied to the macroeconomy of Rome. Those senators appointed to the highest pre-administrative position in the old capital were in charge of the imperial privilegia urbis Rome. The exercise of power increased their status as public figures, but this came with a high responsibility. The most important financial decisions for the budget of the city were made in the distant imperial court, but these Roman billionaires were nonetheless held responsible for the order of their city. The event that destabilized Rome during the 5th century placed an unbearable burden on the elite's shoulder. An historian described the senator's frustration when Emperor Honorius at the time responded to the King Alaric threat of the sack of Rome by paying a considerable amount of gold to the Gothic invader. And the senator said, "This is not a peace, but a pact of slavery." And when sometime later King Alaric demanded from Rome enormous tribute, including elite children as a hostage, the senators were asked to contribute with their own funds to avoid the capture of the city. To collect money, the urban prefect tried to confiscate the property of Santa Melania, of senatorial rank, who had left Rome for the Holy Land. Elite senatorial family of this period relied on property that granted them a yearly income of up to 4,000 pounds of gold, on top of which was the profit from the sale of products like grain and wine, which generated one more third. Second-class senators relied on an income of between 1,000 and 1,500 pounds of gold. In a society that's the sources characterized as made of humiliores, the lower class, and the honestiores, the upper classes with legal privilege, it is difficult to clearly define the economic status of merchants, traders, shop owners, and corporates. For-century inscriptions do not offer much context apart from reminder that these corporations were under the patronage of influential senators and magistrates like the urban prefect and the prefects as they are known. It is possible that some merchants enjoyed a better social status, but this may have changed. Throughout the urban area, in the various neighborhoods, members of the senatorial elite and the urban prefect, above all, exercised the level of control and patronage. With the transition from the Principate to the Dominator in the 4th century, the city of Rome underwent a process of reorganization that lasted for about 200 years. Late 4th century evidence offered critical insight on the social stratification of Rome, wealth, poverty, and power dynamics that persisted during the 5th and the 6th century. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus remained a starting point for any investigation into the social life of the old capital, in which he spent substantial time in the late 4th century. This middle-class Eastern foreigner with a bureaucratic military background opened a unique window into the everyday life, the costume of the Romans, and the relationship of the elite with the lower classes. Extremely important are his digression on the events of Rome. Ammianus was badly impressed by the mentality of the Roman. He blamed the plebs for its vices and the senator for their vanities, superficiality, and excesses. This senator exercised its patronage over a large number of clients. They provided them with the traditional dolls and all the practice ruled in the Republic. Some of them made public display of power with large followings of slaves and eunuchs while walking in the street of Rome. Ammianus' negative view of the society of the urbs found a counterpart in the voice of the illustrious contemporary, the orator Quintus Aurelius Symmachus, a real Romano di Roma and one of the leaders in the Senate House. Symmachus was proud defender of the history of the tradition of his city, in particular of the Senate, which is considered the best part of the human race. His collection of letters is a precious source for understanding senatorial patronage in the late 4th century. Rutilius Damascianus shared the same view a few decades later when he celebrated as privileges those who had the fortune to be born into Rome's nobility and to reside in the glorious old capital. The Theodosian Code and the Novelle Valentiniani are fundamental sources for the period from the 4th to the mid-5th century. Together with inscription and artistic evidence, these laws are our best sources for the professional categories, corporation, and other middle class and lower social strata. The juridical bureaucratic nature of this evidence makes it less helpful for understanding the cultural figure of the cities of Rome, in particular their mentality, on which I'm going to concentrate, and how they look at their privileged status. The last decade of the 5th century Rome are fully represented in the surviving evidence. The gap in the sources from the 450 to early 500s is somehow mitigated by the collection of letters by Cassiodorus, who was a quaestor of the palace, master of the office, and praetorian prefect in the first half of the 6th century. Like Ammianus and Symmachus, Cassiodorus offered much insight on the social life of the city of Rome and the relationship between elite and lower class. Finally, the famous historian Procopius of Caesarea, who spent time in the old capital during the Gothic War, leaves us precious information about the Romans. Although much of the second half of the 5th century is poorly documented, the body of the evidence on the whole is enough to allow us to highlight some of the internal forces, outline some theme of popular mentality, identify form of elite representation during the 200-year period between the late 4th and the mid-6th century. Evoking early times in a letter of 535-6 regarding the supply for Rome, Cassiodorus recalled how Rome was well equipped, and he writes it is evident how great was the population of the city of Rome, saying that she was fed by supplies furnished even from far-off regions, and that this important abundance was reserved for it, while the surrounding provinces sufficed to feed only the resident stranger. Never could the people that ruled the world be smaller in number, for the vast extent of the walls bear witness to the throng of citizens, as do the swollen capacity of the building of entertainments, the wonderful size of the baths, and the great number of water mills, which was clearly provided especially for the food supply. For his last equipment had not been of practical use, it would not have been thought necessary, as it served neither to the beauty of Rome nor anything else. In short, these things are tokens of their cities, as precious clothing is of bodies, since no one rested in devising the luxury whose great cost he can display. Behind this description of a large city hides the consciousness that the Rome of Cassiodorus had much reduced population. Even if the urbs remained an attractive place to live, the calamity of the 5th century gradually reduced the population of the old capital, in spite of the emperor's attempt to salvage the city. Honorius tried to repopulate Rome after the sack of Alaric in 410, which didn't have a strong impact on the number of the inhabitants. The situation worsened in the middle of the 5th century when the Vandals sacked Rome and enslaved many of its inhabitants. But even this tragedy depopulated the old capital only for a short time, and it did not discourage the aristocracy from remaining in Rome. During the 5th century, corporations like the ship owner and the swine merchant, the butcher, weakened. It was not just the uncertainty about the food supply that affected the Roman population, but also the problem of pirates, which was made worse by a progressively weaker imperial fleet, contributing to the debilitation of Italy's economy. Emperor Valentinian III aimed to improve trade and at the same time to keep the population in those difficult times as high as possible. In a law of the year 440, he readmitted in Rome the Greeks merchants that had been expelled because of accusations made by their competitors, the shop owners, that they spoiled the market. Rome needed strong trade, peace, and prosperity, and the emperor could not afford the dropping number of inhabitants. So that's with much vigilant care, prosperity may be provided to the people, and in suspicious circumstances, the city may be inhabited by a larger multitude. So that's indeed that neither the care of the many nor the abundance will be lacking, and the multitude that will benefit the city will be increased. It is not a coincidence that with the same law, the emperor also ordered that both the corporation and other citizens should not be forced into the military, but rather they should take care of the walls, the tower, and the gates of Rome. This effort by the emperor were not enough to protect the old capital. Less than 4 months after remitting the Greek merchants, he had to grant to the Romans the right to carry weapons inside of the city in case of unexpected attacks of the Vandals. The numbers of Rome citizens who were entitled to the distribution of basic aliments like grain, wine, and pork have served as an index for scholars to measure the progressive decline of the population. In particular, the funds allotted for port distribution in the juridical and bureaucratic sources are a good indicator of the changes in late antiquity. Rome. The number of the beneficiaries, which must have represented a substantial part of the population of Romans, shrank between the second half of the 4th and the first half of the 6th century, from 300,000, which is still compatible with the standard of the Imperial Rome, to 120,000 in 419, and this number may suggest a reduction of the total population between the second half of the 4th and the mid-5th century from about 800,000 to 400,000. The number of slaves remained undetermined. The situation worsened during the decade of the 470-490s, and even if Rome experienced some improvement during the reign of Theodoric, by the beginning of the Gothic War, the old capital counted perhaps 60,000 or 50,000 inhabitants. This number above provides some insight, but historians still struggle to understand the size of Roman population. And even if it is hard to believe to Procopius' claim that at the time of Totila capture of Rome in 546, about 500 civilians lives in the city, it is certain that by the end of the Gothic War, Rome was almost entirely depopulated. Not until the era of Pope Gregory the Great, up to 604, did the population again grow to over 50,000 people. Ancestral tradition and holiday were strong enough in popular culture to survive the most catastrophic periods. Even the first Roman bishops were often unsuccessful when they challenged them. Shortly before the sack of Alaric in 410, the urban prefect tried to encourage some Romans to resume old pagan rituals to protect the city. In the middle of the 5th century, Pope Leo the Great accused the Romans of being more devoted to the circus game than to the place of the apostles, who were credited to have saved the city from the barbarians. And a few decades later, Pope Gelasius railed against those Romans who still celebrated the Lupercalia, or used to pray to the temple of the Dioscuri to keep the sea safe in order to receive food supply. According to Procopius, even at the time of the Gothic War, some Romans still appealed to old beliefs banned by Christianity and attempt to reopen the door of the war god like the temple of Janus, hoping to change the course of the war. Gestures like these were not simply religious superstition acts, were rooted in a 1,000-year-old tradition. Ammiano's ridiculous attachment of the Roman elite to the old glories of the city, their pride in the deeds of the ancestor, and their desire to erect their own statues in the forum of Trajan, in endless evocation of a long-distant past. Monument, another representative of public building, remained important symbol of the Romans' identity, even after the city suffered from the Gothic and the Vandal war. And those emperors who tried to damage like the monument, to take like material, eventually they were punished or they were encouraged to leave the town. During the time of Odoacer and the Gothic kings, the restoration of monument and the maintenance of the city's infrastructure remained part of the budget entrusted to the urban prefect. However, senators continued to take care of some prominent buildings like the Colosseum and the Theatre of Pompeii. This exegetism was often encouraged by the rulers, as in the previous centuries, the beauty of the urbs were vandalized by thieves. Cassiodorus commented on this issue to his The Accounts of the City of Rome. It is right that public resentment curses those who disfigure the beauty of the ancient by amputating their limbs and who do to public monument things that they deserve to suffer themselves. Even during the catastrophe of the Gothic War, the Romans remained attached to the monuments as symbol of their own identity. Procopius, who like Ammianus was a foreigner from the East, was impressed by this collective pride. As he writes, still the Romans love their city above all the men we know, and they are eager to protect all the ancestral legacy and preserve it, so that nothing of the ancient glory of Rome may be obliterated. Even though they lived long under barbarian sway, they preserved the building of the city and most of its ornaments. After the Gothic War, Justinian reconfirmed the funds for structure of vital importance in order to guarantee the customary payment and privilege of the cities of Rome. Now we enter a mentality situation. By the end of the 4th century, circus games had lost their sacral meaning, but they still served as a venue for highly important interaction between elite and population. Those wealthy senators that in the 5th and 6th century could still afford to enter political life honored their children's praetorship and consulship by sponsoring a week of expensive game and generous donation to the Romans. Olympiodorus reported astonishing number people paid between the end of the 4th and the beginning of the 5th century by senators of the most distinguished family of Rome from the inaugural ceremonies of their children's praetorship: 1,200 pounds, 2,000 pounds Symmachus, 4,000 pounds Maximus. A century later, the philosopher Boëtius recalled with pride that the celebration with which To the joy of the plebs, he had sponsored the joint consulship of his two sons, the last descendants of the Anician and Simagi family in the year 522. The disparity of income between senatorial families, combined with the competition to outdo each other in public munificence, caused many senators to feel overwhelmed by the crushing expenses. An historian, a pagan historian, concluded his work by encouraging the billionaire of Rome not to damage the air by wasting their patrimony to enrich mimes and buffoons. This time he seems to agree with Ambrosius of Milan, who claimed it is wasteful to spend one's own wealthy merely for the sake of gaining the favor of the people. These they do who spend their inheritance on the game of the circus, on the theatrical pieces and gladiatorial show, or even a combat of wild beasts just to surpass the fame of their forefather for this thing. The pagan historian Zosimus blamed Constantine for forcing praetors to undertake higher expenses. In the reality, in a Rome without emperors, this game represented the occasion for elite young men to enter the public scene, to begin political life through an impressive act of evangelists that could make them public figure at the age of 17. Elite families that could afford this expense renewed their patronage over the community and transmitted it to the next generation. This bond is echoed by the orator of Demagogues in his letter concerning his plan for his son praetorship in the year 399. He writes, "The praetorship of my son is expected for next year. I had to provide throughout bread resources in order that my money has for the expectation of the Roman people. In fact, I had to surpass the fame of my own example, which, after the consular munificence of our family and also the pastoral game of my son, does not announce anything mediocre about us. In this matter, I'm not afraid that you will judge me for seeking the prize of the people. You know, indeed, that the magistrates of a great city are not suitable for petty souls. This also your dear Cicero admonished, condemning luxury in private matter, but approving magnificence in public. This is a good example of how a elite senator belonging to one of the most important families in Rome felt pressured by the high expectation of the community. In his society, exaggerated expense could generate criticism from the aristocracy. This inevitably clashed with Demagogues' aim to please the community in a way that would establish a legacy for his son. Still at the beginning of Theodoric rule in Italy, in 494, Asterius organized circus game as well as spectacle in the theater and the amphitheater in what he described as a memorable day that cost his entire fortune. 3 times did I earn cheers, 3 times the young people sang out my prize in the theater, my fortune vanished into my fame, for such losses bear the fruit of glory. Those do the game preserve the expenditure of my rich, and a single day that saw 3 spectacles will last and hand on Asterius to a lively future. Asterius spent the wealth he had won on his consulship. To disappoint the expectation of the crowd could spoil this important moment and negatively impact the public images of the sponsor of the games. Ammianus related an accident of this kind during the celebration of the praetorship of Volusiano Lampadius. The people were unsatisfied with the games and largely distributed, Lampadius, being unable to endure the blustering of the commons, in order to show his generosity and his contempt of the mob, he summoned some beggars from the Vatican and presented them with valuable gifts. No matter how Christianized Rome was at this time, the idea to feed the people of God, the plebeians, with games money was an insult to the circus crowd. The agentes that Ammianus referenced were poor beggars who live in the suburbs like the Vatican. It is not possible to determine whether these were citizens of Rome or poor migrants. They live on alms and with the help of the church, it doesn't make any distinction. Lampadius' attitudes on his lack of generosity may have damaged his image in front of the population, as a year later his prefecture went under a very turbulent time. Sant'Agostine complained about game and race in his time. His work confirmed this mentality. He was shocked by this expense, which he considered money wasted to foment the spoiler relationship between benefactor and beneficiaries. He also could not understand the crowd negligence for the poor. Men become insane, right? They want to lose their fortune by donating to players, to actors, to fighters, or wild beasts to carry over. How much they donate, how much they spend. They squander the strength not only of their patrimonies, but also their own souls. They despise the poor because the people do not clamor for the poor to take, but they clamor for the figure of wild beasts to take. And all become insane. He who is watched, and he who watched, and he who donates. The effort by bishop and Christian apology never were enough to change his psychology of power, and circus race remain social and cultural moment independent from the religious orientation of both the donor and the crowd. In addition to those who financed the game, Some elite senators exercised the patronage over the circus faction, whose leader they could use to exacerbate social unrest in the capital. It was still true in Theodoric time, in 509, when violence broke between the faction of the Greens and the Blue, and behind the social tension were both senators and plebeians, with the latter accuser verbally insulting the former. Circus games were and remain among the most powerful internal force of the city of Rome. They could become violent, but they also could deter riots in another situation of collective stress. In 409, during the starvation shortly before the sack of Alari, the Romans were entertained with games. Still in 550, King Totila offered circus race in his attempt to show his affection to the Romans who were still living there. These were the last race in the history of the ancient Rome. The Gothic king's intention not to punish the exhausted population seems to be corroborated by the Book of the Popes, which claimed that Totila lived with the Romans like a father with his own children. The Romans were conscious of their privileged status, of which they were proud, and it was still true at the time of Cassiodorus, who, when writing to his subordinate in Rome about food supply, notes, although all the citizens might be favored, the Romans deserved something more. A city adorned with so many illustrious senators, blessed with such noble people, should resound with the praises of our prince, such that a foreigner would be amazed to hear. Cassiodorus clearly distinguished here between the Roman citizens of the kingdom and the citizens of the city of Rome, who were entitled to this privilege. In a city so polarized between elite and lower classes, some billionaires who enter political life with lavish gain and gift would be later in charge of the city as urban prefect. Generally, a member from the aristocracy of Rome, the urban prefect was the city patron for the time of his mandate. To him, the city of Rome is entrusted, as Cassiodorus used to write. Already during the Principate, this magistrate was so important that his death could be mourned in Rome with a public funeral and the interruption of public business. His power and prestige further increased after the emperor abandoned Rome. Ammianus record the event of Rome during when he discussed the administration of urban prefect, and some of them belonged to families that maintained leadership for another 200 years. Together with the prefect of the Annona for the grain distribution, the urban prefect was responsible for food distribution and other privileges of the Rome. While the Praetorian prefect determined the budget for Rome from distant imperial court, the two city magistrates were close to the population, and this required special attention, as Cassiodorus claimed in the promotion letter for the prefect of the Annona. Although grain supply are provided by the Praetorian prefect, it is no less praiseworthy to distribute the wheat in a worthy way than to collect it, since complaining is not extinguished by any amount of abundance if the bread is served without refinement. The sources bear witness to the blend of prestige and risk that the city magistrate involved. Cassiodorus warned the prefect of Annona on the consequence of missing the expectation of the plebs. Consider now why it is not legitimate to steal anything from the people, for silence cannot hide what is perpetrated to the detriment of the city. The crowd doesn't know how to stay silent, and sometimes even say things that nobody has done. What should you decide more than 6 people's gratitude, which we also opt for? Such experiment, which scholars have largely overlooked, remind me of unfortunate rumors that spread among the crowd like fire. A good case is the episode of Avianus Immagus, the father of the orator, as I mentioned before, that according to Ammianus, while in the year 364-5 had been an exemplary urban prefect in taking care of the people and restoring the monument of Rome. The same citizen did not show any gratitude 10 years later when they accused him of planning to use his wine to slack lime kilns rather than to sell it to the lower price than the plebe wished. The rumor was spread by a common fellow among the plebeians without any proof of evidence or a witness. It resulted in the mob burning down one of Avianus' houses, which was located in Trastevere, close to the bridge that he has restored. The whole situation was likely a misunderstanding about the Avianus' intention, or perhaps it was a rumor spread from the Senate House by his political enemies. The reality was, even 10 years after his prefecture of the city, which was exemplary, Avianus was still a public figure in Rome, and he could not escape his status. That threats compelled him to leave the city. He was able to return when his son Aurelius Immagus convinced the emperor that the popular threat was over and that the plebs' mood had changed. Cassiodorus, Praetorian prefect, expressing himself about the delicacy of dealing with the plebs. He warned his agent Vicius to make sure that nobody suffered the hunger in the city. One of his concerns was the preservation of the quality and weight of the bread during the distribution. He made it clear that the royal donation of food have to reach the addressees undiminished and uncorrupted. His wording is similar to the one that he addressed the Annona prefect. Cassiodorus remind to the Rocator that there is no worse fraud than the one perpetrated at the expense of the Roman plebs, which is described with this word: the crowd that live quietly, a people that is notable only when it is happy, a clamor without sedition, a noise that doesn't know no rage. For them, the only aspiration is to escape poverty, and they do not even desire well. For they do not know greed, nor they torment themselves with the cunning of business. They live in modest condition, but they feel rich. Such an idyllic description of the crowd sharply contrasts with what Ammianus, who despised the irreverent like plebe disaptitude, like wrote about the people spending time and drinking in taverns during the night, hanging outside and waiting for games. And here this quotation: the multitude of lowest condition of great poverty spend the entire night in wine shop, some lords in the shade of pounding of the theater, or they quarrel with one another in the games of dice, making a disgusting sound by drawing back the breath into the resounding nostril. Or which is the favorite among all amusement, from sunrise until evening in sunshine and in rain, they stand open-mouthed, examining minutely the good points or the defect of Carioter and the author. And it is most remarkable to see an innumerable crowd of plebeians, their mind filled with a kind of eagerness, hanging on to the outcome of the chariot's race. Ammianus powerfully describes his perception as a foreigner of the degenerated life in Rome of the plebs and what he disdainfully viewed as their priority. No less powerful is Ammianus' description of the crowd waiting for the distribution of pork, in which he described with disgust the desperation of the angry mob. Led by the charm of the odor of cooking and the shrill voice of the women, like a flock of peacocks screaming with anger, stand even from cockcrow beside the pots and tiptoe and nod the ends of their finger as they wait for the dishes to cool, and so on. So Ammianus cleared distaste for the Roman crowd, standing in contrast to Cassiodorus' view as a Praetorian prefect who was a fundamental link in the supply chain. Yet even if Ammianus and Cassiodorus differ widely in their feeling toward the plebs, they commented on the same element, both recognized that the people craved food and stability, anxious for their subsistence. Both understood that they were not rebellious by principle against the city, but rather they were ready to show gratitude to a generous patron. Cassiodorus highlighted the social responsibility of the urban prefect in an appointment letter. Still at this time, the priority were bread and circus, both of them they were sources of enjoyment and risk. The dispute he alluded, he may evoke the situation of the year 579, when it actually was some riots like in the circus. The prefect of Annona cooperated with the urban prefect in gathering and distributing the supply. The two magistrates were at the top of a long supply chain. They could be easily compromised by any inconvenience or delay that prevent the provision for rich in Rome. Natural calamities, piracy, wars, loss of providers like Africa. Even if it's generally not responsible for the famine, the two city prefects were easily targeted for public anger. In 468, Sidonius Apollinarius, the urban prefect, asked the prefect of Annona to run immediately to the harbor of the city and welcome the ship carrying the supply. A failure in the operation would generate social tension. Situation like this no lack of precedent. Still at the end of the 5th century, the bishop of Galatia mocked the pagan tradition, remarking that during the winter, the Dioscuri were unable to provide the good weather to help the ship arrive to the harbor of Rome. Curiously, this very bishop, who was credited for saving Rome from famine, may also have been gone to the harbor for waiting for ship, like the pagan prefect used to do. More than a century later, the same did the urban prefect Symmachus, when he actually went with the Senate and the plebs there to wait. This example reminds us how important were public appearances in a large and populated city where an uncontrolled rumor could generate chaos and fuel riots. Therefore, the new city prefect to show friendship on a public occasion was an important message to the population. Cassiodorus writes to the prefect of the Annona, you ascend the carriage of the urban prefect with shared gratitude. During the show, you are found very close to him, so that's the plebs who your commitment fits, not that you are honored in his reverence. For if complaint for bread arise, as the guarantor of prosperity, resolve civic uprising by giving the people immediate satisfaction. The letter of the urban prefect Sidonius indicated how important the good relationship was for both magistrates. In fact, if the prefect of the Annona was successful in providing supply, he would gain the favor of Sidonius, who will, on his turn, gain the favor of the plebs. Sidonius' big fear was that the unhappiness of the people would take the form of a complaint during the show. I fear However, lest the din of the enclosed theatre resound with the anger of the Roman people, and the public famine is attributed to my misfortune. His fear was well justified. 6 years early, in 409, the starving mob of Rome had shouted against the urban prefect during the circus game, please fix a price to human flesh. Because this magistrate failed to feed the population, he was eventually mobbed and executed in the forum. The Annona prefect also was under this kind of pressure, and Symmachus reminded him in 391 that's how lucky he was that his clothes had not been yet ripped off by angry women. Symmachus was right indeed. A few decades later, Rutilius Amatianus claimed that he was lucky that during his urban magistracy, actually nothing happened, and this was the merit of the people of Rome. In addition to the cities and the urbs, housed a large number of foreigners called peregrini, who were mostly citizens of the empire, but not of the city of Rome. Many of them were merchants and traders, and occasionally also soldiers, whose presence was often cause of tension. When famine threatened, the plebs could use the games as occasion to pressure the urban prefect to enact demagogic measures. For example, during the prefecture of Aurelius Symmachus, foreigners were expelled from Rome at the behest of the Cives Romani Domo Roma. Once again, the circus may have been the place for collective complaints. Ammianus used intense words of blame. Alas, we have reached such a state of business that whereas not so very long ago, when there was a fear of a scarcity of food, foreigners were driven neck and crop from the city. Even the new teacher of liberal art were expelled, while the many performers remained untouched. Those who practiced liberal art were thrust out without a breathing space, yet the genuine attendants upon actors of the mimes and those who, for the time, pretended to be such, were kept with us, while 3,000 dancing girls, without even being questioned, remained here with their choruses and an equal number of dancing masters. To Ammianus, the target of discrimination are those who live in Rome, but are born within the city of Rome, and they are therefore not entitled to the benefit. The situation was very embarrassing to Symmachus, who prayed to the gods that the famine would end and that the peregrini could be called back. His word announced the uncomfortable situation of such an action, which damaged his images in and outside of Rome. We are afraid of being deprived of subsistence, and yet all those whom Rome had welcomed, discovered in it a nourishing breast, have been expelled. May we be healed by such remedies. What hatred among the provincial is costing us this security. God of the fatherland, forgive us for neglecting your worship. Chase away this dreadful famine. Let our city recall those it had wrongly sent away as soon as possible. Yet this xenophobia echoed that on the 1st century Juvenal, who mocked the large immigration to Rome from the east, quipping that the Syrian Orontes was flowing into the Tiber, and in no coincidence this letter was particularly beloved in the 4th century. From the city of Milan, the Bishop of Ambrose denounced this base action with prominent words. He blamed the urban prefect and the other rich illustrious men for making such a decision. He, when the city was suffering from famine, and as is common in such case, the people demanded the stranger should be forbidden the city, having the office of the prefecture of the city, which is higher than the rest, called together the official and richer men, and demanded that they should take counsel for the public welfare. The situation Ambrose described is that of a broken society. Foreigners who spent most of their life in Rome and whose children were born there, saw themselves deprived of their right to live in the city, and their family was split. And he writes, how much more expedient was this than that which was done lately at Rome? There, from the widely extended city, were those expelled who had already passed most of their life in it. In tears, they went forth with their children, for whom as being citizens they bewailed the exile, which they said ought to be averted. No less did they grieve over the broken bonds of union, the severed ties of relationship. The city alone needed the corn to be brought into it. He could have got help if he had sought corn from the Italians whose children they were driving out. Nothing is more shameful than to expel a man as a foreigner, as an alien, no? And yet to claim his service as though he belonged to us. How can to expel a man who lives on his own produce? How can to expel him who supplied thee with food? The situation suggests that in normal times, some of the foreigners who had been living in Rome for a long time benefited from some of the gifts distributed at public events. 150 years later, Cassiodorus reminded his bureaucrats that the royal distribution of the gift and supply were meant only for the city of Rome and not for any adults living in the capital. Make sure that no one take what the citizens deserve and that you do not lose your favor by abandoning the love of the citizen. Do not let someone become a Latin, which is mean Roman in this case, with a pride, who does not have by birth the right of the city. These are the gift of the quirites of the citizens of Rome. The condition of the servant should not steal the position of the free. He sins against the majesty of the Roman people, who contaminate the purity of his blood by mixing it with that of the servant. At this late date, Castelloros offered one of the best clarifications of what Romans are entitled to benefit. He distinguished the Roman citizen in general from the citizen of Rome on a juridical basis, the right of the city. Those are the quirites, the one they are called the citizens of Rome. Not only did the quirites regard poor outsiders with suspicion, but also foreign businessmen. At some point, as we saw before, the Greek merchants were expelled because of the jealousy of the shop owner. They felt threatened by the competition of foreign merchants whose business had compromised the price established in the public market. The shop owners were an important category for the social life of Rome, and not just because they own the place where the plebe likes to spend the night during their night. They were also influential in the civic life, as they were part of corporation that was under the patronage of a prefect. Xenophobia persisted among the lower classes, so Zomeno, the Christian historian, considered this sin to be one of the causes of the divine revenge against the Roman of Alaric Sac. The calamity were indication of divine wrath to justice them from the luxury, the debauchery, and the manifold act of injustice toward each other, as well as the stranger. During the Gothic period, and I come here to my conclusion, senators still rely on the revenues of large rural property as they exercise administration of patronage in the city of Rome. Theodoric in 500, the king granted grain supplies to the citizens for an amount of 120 measures. 1/7 of these were meant only for the poor of the Church of St. Peter as a part of the religious philanthropy of this king. No matter whether they held a juridical status of citizens of Rome, those beggars from the Vatican Hill, they represented now a substantial part of the people of God, the plebs days. To them, in the mid-5th century, Pope Leo had provided supply when imperial administration was no longer able to regularly do so. From the point of view of the Pope, it did not matter whether these were citizens of Rome or poor foreigners living in the old capital. The Roman bishop continued to operate on behalf of the poor of the city, as a letter of Pope Gelasius to the mother of Theodoric Relieva shows. The donation of the kings to the traditional beneficiary probably covered only a part of the necessary budget, enough perhaps for 2,000 individuals. Following Theodoric, Justinian confirmed the unknown to those Romans who were entitled. We may wonder how many of the citizens who had survived the Gothic War were still direct descendants from these registered in the list of the beneficiaries. Many of these lists didn't exist anymore after 20-year war and such. For unclear reason, Justinian instead terminated the funding for the distribution of the poor of St. Peter, which actually started to rely only on the Pope's children. It was not the Gothic rule, but rather the Gothic War that put a permanent end to the senatorial administration and patronage of Rome. Already in 535, the city had reacted against a garrison that the king had sent to protect the inhabitants from, even possibly to avoid the defection of the city. Other kings asked Rome for support against Justinian, remind all the benefit that the Gothic kings had done in the past. And Procopius reported, that is an interesting source, that the senators were wearing the clothing of slave and peasant, begging the enemies for bread and food in 546. They knocked on doors, families asking for food. One of them was the widow of Boetius, Rusticiana. This woman belonged to one of the most illustrious families of the late antique Rome. Her children were among the last in the history of Rome to bear the expense of celebrating a consular game. Her father Symmachus was the descendant of the famous orator, had been the head of the Senate for at least a decade. And like her ancestor and a member of the family, Rusticiana used to lavish her wealth on the needy. More than 40 years later, in 590, Pope Gregory the Great would address the praetor of Sicily. At this point, the prefecture doesn't practically play any more role, and the grain from Rome come actually from the island, begging from the grain supply that Rome so badly needed. Now this time it's the Pope, the prefect doesn't play any role. Regarding this matter, he writes, be careful, because if not enough grain is delivered here, not only one man, but the whole population is massacred. This plea echoes the earliest word of Symmachus and Sidonius Apollinaris, but they are not the entreaties of a urban prefect. As the survival of the Roman aristocracy grew impoverished, as the traditional game and circus race disappeared, and the senatorial magistrates who were in charge of donation lost their primacy, the distinction between the urban plebs of the beneficiaries of the imperial and post-imperial distribution and those paupers the poor who traditionally receive alimonies and charity from the church practically collapsed. By this time, the heavy burden on the service of the community rested practically only on the shoulder of the Pope. He, rather than the Byzantine exarch of Italy, inherited the patronage of the people who were now transformed into the plebs day of the early medieval Rome. Thank you.
When Rome became so depopulated in the fifth and fifth century, where did all those people go? Did they go to other cities, is that right, or did they move into the country?
Well, when the cities start to be targeted by barbarian, I would say, by migration and things, a lot of people, they didn't trust the town and they moved in the countryside. The loss of Africa in the 430 and some other provinces they were supplying like Rome is actually generated this situation of hunger happened repeatedly. And on top, the risk of the town to be plundered is actually discouraged the population. The senator actually, recent study has proved that they were most stuck because they want to keep staying there, because their power status actually relied on this psychological dimension. The emperor is not in Rome who take care of the people, and so you have the transposition, like transporting of the patron-client system from emperor and the citizen of Rome to the rich senator and the citizen of Rome. But if the population doesn't get enough supply and if you're threatened by the war and by Vandals attacks and that kind of stuff, they actually go on the countryside. And also, of course, many were captured and killed, they starved, you know, it's, yeah.
You didn't venture there, but I suspect many of us were thinking that the analogy of extremely powerful people expanding their power and so on by possessing sports teams. That may not be just something we associate with Rome.
The possessive what? Sorry.
Sports teams.
Right.
Athletes.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, they were usually in charge, among like the people behind the faction, because even this game, they were not paid with public money; they were sponsored by private. So there were faction in Constantinople. There were 4 of them, and you know the Nicariotes actually put the town in a big risk. And Rome did never went that far, but there was still always problem between senators. They accused each other. Oh, this plebeian, this client of you has insulted me, and then. But we don't have for cases like this. We don't have like this continuity that, for example, we have for like other of the elements that I highlighted. So there is a little bit more for Constantinople when it comes about circus riots and factions. Yeah.